So I don't need to look at a camera, is what you're saying.
No, we can just chit chat like this. Is this on? This is not on. Is yours on?
We're live.
We're live. We're going. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
It's good to have you back. Wait, can I tell you that our last conversation, I've had people tell me that they used what you said when it came to asking different questions.
Mm.
And I can't remember. Oh, instead of asking how your day is, ask what's good in your world.
What's good in your world?
Yeah. One of my friends told me she tried it with a coworker and she learned a lot more about her coworker than she would have if it was, hey, what's up? How's it going?
So much more interesting. And you get to see people squirm if they're like, nothing. Good. Oh, what? Well, I guess this is good. You just got
Yeah, it's a question that you're getting inside somebody.
right.
Yeah.
It kind of throws people off. They're not used to the typical script.
They're not used to this genuine curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad that was one thing that was helpful.
You know what? I love a takeaway. I love a practical, you get to use this in real time and change the course of a conversation or a day.
Yes, a little homework assignment from your podcast.
Yeah. We're all about action here.
Yes, I love it.
Speaking of
Yes,
spirituality.
one of my favorite topics.
Yes, because you went to school not for divination, like I originally
Not
said.
Harry Potter world.
No, it's not.
Yeah, Master's in Divinity at Duke University. So I'm not an expert by any means, but I have a lot of depth to prove that I went to school. Ways to think about this topic.
Well, even, and this is not, again, this is something I'm loosely familiar with.
Sure.
Although, like Catholic school, I feel like I should be more familiar with it because this is what we talked about day in and day out for 13 years of my elementary and high school education. But I think it was, and I might be totally off on this, but it might be like Thomas More, who was a famous theologian who wasn't Christian or Catholic or anything, and then went to the church realm.
There was Thomas Merton that was really big into like Buddhist philosophy.
There it is.
And spent a lot of time at Buddhist monasteries and became a monk himself. And so he kind of merged a lot of those kind of thoughts, or like, hey, this is a Buddhist tradition, but we've actually had this in the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition for just as long or longer. And so how do we not be afraid of these other spiritual practices? But how do we kind of see that truth exists everywhere and we can claim truths from other traditions and apply it to our like application without being like paranoid of like, oh, this is like some like, voodoo practice that like we should totally stay away from. Like, yoga is like a modern kind of hot topic of like, yoga is traditionally like a very spiritual practice with like a very intended purpose, and these different postures and moves are they acts of worship, or in a modern context is it just physical body movement? And for someone in a different religious tradition, can they practice those where they're not appropriating, but they're also not like worshiping something other than what they're intended to do, which is just get a good stretch on in a hot yoga class.
Well, it is so interesting how it's evolved over time. I mean, of course, when I think of what yoga is here in the West, it is far from what yoga was once intended.
Right.
Yeah.
How many yoga teachers learn like 5 Sanskrit words and
Me.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you do it because you have to, or it sounds cool, or it's like,
Uh-huh.
it's a centering word maybe. And so,
Yeah.
So it calms the.
It sounds cool to say Vashisasana for side plank. I mean, come on now.
I love it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So you want to start with a big question?
Big question. Let's go.
Big topic. Spiritual crisis. Are we all in one?
I think we are. Maybe collectively, at least in the West. I think we are. Whether it is a kind of like post-pandemic reevaluation or kind of writing off the tail of the pandemic, but I think people are reassessing their kind of value systems and right when it felt like the world was ending, it's like, well, why are we doing any of this? Like, what's the purpose of any of this? why am I waking up in the morning? Why am I like busting my butt to work for this employer when I like do not like this job? Right. So there are a lot of like kind of cultural shifts with the workplace, a lot more people working from home, a lot of people now back in the workplace and hating it because they enjoy kind of the freedoms that that allowed. But I think part of all that is tied into this kind of greater question of, what's the purpose of my life and where do I find value and meaning and connection and what am I doing here?
Wow, all very big questions.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers, but yeah, I think those are some questions that people are kind of asking that maybe haven't asked those in a long time or ever. That it kind of felt maybe unavoidable with the pandemic, and maybe you did acquire some mental space and freedom from making some more, boundaried choices in your life. And so now with that extra time and energy and mental space, it's kind of opens you up to, well, yeah, but there's got to be something else going on here. So what am I doing this for? What am I, yeah, how do I kind of see myself in this bigger picture?
I like to think of COVID as everyone went to rehab,
Mm,
because in rehab there is nothing else but you, the groups that you're going to, who you're talking with, and your thoughts essentially.
yeah,
Um, COVID took everything away, and when you're forced to essentially face something, whether it's the fears about what's happening in the world, what's happening outside of your own house, about what it means to be around people, like I mean, we were all forced to face a lot of our own shit in
yeah,
whatever way that looked. But I think that now we're in 2025,
yeah,
and I'm even having conversations with personally and professionally people who are going, what's the purpose? What, the why bothers can be a bit more of a nihilistic
sure.
kind of perspective. But then there's the like, what am I doing this for? I think is where really the flip side of that.
Yeah, I think, uh, I mean, it then impacts, like the answer to that question impacts everything you do, right? It impacts how you see yourself in the world, how you kind of evaluate your immediate circle, like family, friends, and then how do you care for people outside of that, right? Like all of the great political divides I think we are constantly experiencing, especially online, is it's the famous parable from Jesus is like the parable of the Good Samaritan. The question is at the core of that is, who is my neighbor? Like,
Mm.
it's the question is asked, like, who do I actually have to care about? You're like, well, in that parable, the question is everyone, or the answer is everyone. And so it expands one's horizon and expands your world and who we're actually like responsible for, rather than just this very insular, like, I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to get through these 2 weeks of the pandemic. Surprised it wasn't 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Uh, right. And so it a lot of these questions kind of expand our scope of who's in our world and realizing that what we do impacts much more largely than we want to think about sometimes.
Mhm. I like to, so the book Atomic Habits that James Clear wrote, he used the word atomic because it had two meanings. You can use it as an atom, like these tiny things that add up to something, or like the atomic bomb, which is like something that's huge that is atomic and it's big and impactful.
Yeah.
And I think about this in kind of like the two ways is that we are all interconnected on a very individual level, on a cellular level,
Mm.
but then how much of an impact that has, like when we think of purpose or meaning, and how much bigger that is than all of us. But it has the and both to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. This is my friend Glenn's favorite book, by the way. So if you haven't read it, definitely ask her if you see her.
Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits.
No.
Um, yeah, I think right. I think that's right. Like uh, it's all connected, right? What I do inside, this kind of internal aspect impacts everything on the outside, and perhaps that world is bigger than we previously wanted to kind of have this notion of or could imagine. So, and then some of that is digitally minded, like it we are more connected now than ever, and we're also more lonely than ever. And so, yeah, how can that all kind of coexist? And I guess the question today is, what do we do about that?
Do you have the answers? Can you solve this for us
We
right
can solve
now
it today in
in
the
this?
next 10 minutes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
No, yeah, I think with this kind of greater questioning, like there's a massive uptick of people re-engaging with more traditional religious traditions, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, um, Buddhism, Islam. Islam is the fastest growing religion today. Um, and so we wouldn't have seen this coming, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So there are people that are really engaging with these kind of more traditional religious traditions. But then also, I think more people engaging with this kind of broader spirituality of like, well, I grew up Catholic or I grew up this, and I'm not that, but I do feel this tug or this pull towards some type of structure or some type of formation, some type of ordering of my life. And I'm trying to figure out what that is.
I do think that because something that you mentioned about spirituality is whether someone identifies as being spiritual or not, it lives inside of us in some way.
Yeah.
Sort of like the Lion King lives in you, lives in me. It's like there's something that's connecting us
Yeah.
to something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your previous podcast with Heather Waxman, I think she had the great line. She was like, everything is therapeutic. And I think my add on to that is everything is spiritual. So everything we do has some type of, it exists somewhere in this kind of touching of the heart, right? Um, it shows how we're being formed and what we're being formed into. And so I think everything we do touches that in some way, shape, or form. And so I think everything is spiritual, and I think everyone is spiritual. We don't like stasis is not on the menu. We don't get to opt out of being spiritually formed. So if we're all being spiritually formed by everything around us, everything that we engage in, everyone we interact with is forming us into the person that we're becoming, then yeah, if we don't get to opt out of that, the question is more so like, what is forming me? And how do I structure or like architect my life in a way that formation is actually breathing life into me and making me yeah, a person of love that is able to then share that love with others. And most spiritual traditions boil down to that, right? That there are all these different practices that we can focus on: meditation, prayer, attending divine services, acts of service, caring for the poor. But a lot of that boils down to love. And are you being formed into a person of love that can then either, and or reflect that back to whatever you feel like that source is, whether it's God or something else. But then there's always the second part of that. It's back to that source and outward to share with others. So yeah, I think we're all being formed. So it's a matter of what are we being formed into.
It's it is interesting because I think that particularly I don't know when this trend particularly started, but it's seemingly around the 2010s. I'll say like the 2012, maybe 2015 era that the I'm atheist and I know everything kind of came on the scene. If it's not in science, then is it really real? And as I like to joke, I'm like, yeah, if you meet liberal atheist guy at a party, he's going to debate you into everything and why the table is real or not real. So be aware of that kind of thing. But I think that there's even if it's in science, it's like there's some sort of grounding that we're looking for, no matter what it is, no matter what you identify as. I think that even when people say identify as atheist, I think you identify as something. And whether that is in spirituality or in lack thereof or in something else, that there's something that I think people are looking for that sense of grounding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we want grounding, and we're all creatures of wonder, right? And so most of our spiritual traditions and practices and religions are they're not just to answer that, like, oh, well, you wonder, is there life after death? We've got the answer. Stay tuned for the next episode. Um, Come back next week. But almost to stimulate that wonder of, yeah, like life is a great mystery. We have some thoughts on it. We have some practices that we feel like help us tap into the deepest source of truth and love to form us and to help us go back out into the world. But I think there's kind of this like, I mean, I think a lot of the great modern scientific breakthroughs were people that were of particular faith traditions. They were people that were devout in their faith, and this wasn't a church or science. It wasn't a faith community or the experimental method. It was because of this particular faith tradition. It stimulates my wonder and curiosity about the world. And there's always going to be more that we can't explain. There's always going to be more we don't understand, right? And I think therapy is such a great example of that. Like we are trying our best. We are learning more and more every day. We have different therapy modalities, but they are flexible. They have to be, right? We haven't found the answer that just fixes everything. And yeah, so we keep adjusting and we amend things, and we keep going to conferences. We keep getting certifications, but it's always, we're trying to understand, we're trying our best, we're trying to hone in. But there's the human mind, and the human heart is so vast and ever expanding. It's like, how can we don't have the answer, so we're seeking that, right? We're seeking to understand, and we're at the same time filled with wonder of, yeah, like how do we embrace that mystery and work with that instead of fighting against it too. We have to explain everything. We have to have the answer for everything. If we just try hard enough, if we just do enough, evidence-based studies, then we're gonna get to the bottom of this, right? The more I think astronomy is a great example. The more you study, the more you don't know.
Yes.
And I've always felt like therapy and coming from working in various sort of religious spaces, that rings true as well. Just like, oh, the more I know, the more I don't. Like the more more questions I have, the more I'm curious about what makes someone tick and what brings them joy in life. So
It's chronic excavation. It's
yeah,
once you scratch a layer, then there's another layer underneath, and then you can keep kind of digging. Like
yeah,
it does feel, part of the excitement I think around spirituality is that there's many layers and it doesn't really end.
mm,
And that can feel uncertain and maybe a little scary. But I also think that that's the exciting part. And it's like, I kind of joke, I'm like, yeah, it's like the path to enlightenment. It's like, we don't actually get there, but it's kind of cool to learn how to figure it out like along the way. And maybe, who knows, but it's just the process.
yeah. I think there was a book by C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce, and he talks about God or source or whatever, the ultimate reality, right? Whatever word you want to use, as this mountain. And so for him, writing about this heaven wasn't are you in or out? Like, did you get into the club or not? Did you get past the gates? But rather like it is journeying deeper and deeper and deeper into this mountain. And you never get to the top. There's no end. There's no just like, okay, now I get to chill, but that God is infinite, ultimate reality is infinite, and so we're always journeying deeper. There's no end point. We don't arrive. We are arriving. We are being made to be more like that ultimate reality, but we don't ever in a particular way reach that end, right? And that kind of, I think, in a good way, pushes us to keep striving and keep growing, healing, learning, and loving. So.
So it's a good thing to not know everything.
Apparently. Although everything we do is says the opposite, I think.
It's attractive, right? Well, I mean, if we think about even like AI is basically this tool to say, hey, you can know anything at literally the
Breakneck speed.
yes. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's you wanna know something? Here, I got you. Um, gosh, back in our day, it was like AIM and Smarter Child. That was our version of like ChatGPT, and now it's just this infinite, just knowledge source in some ways. But on the flip side of that, I don't think they said knowledge is power, but I think knowledge is just one aspect of it. I don't think that wisdom and knowledge go hand in hand all the time. I don't think they're synonymous. Is another way of saying it. I think that wisdom is actually recognition about knowing when it is to have a sense of humility and owning that humility. Whereas knowledge is more about I can expand on what I do know and expand that curiosity. But I think wisdom has a sense of humility with it.
Yeah, I mean, you can read a book on ACT, but like as a therapist, to put that into practice and to have the ability to read the room and read the client and figure out like how to actually do this. Like I read about it, I have the knowledge, but I don't have the lived sort of wisdom and experience to actually use this tool in a useful way, right? Um, I would love to be an incredible painter. You put a paintbrush in my hand, I can splash some things on canvas, but it looks nothing like someone would do that is actually trained in this, has made all the mistakes, learned all these things. They didn't just read the books; they put in the 10,000 hours, right? And so I think the heart and the mind are that way too, right? That I like that separation. That knowledge can be part of that, but wisdom is knowing how to use that tool. It's not just knowing that the tool exists or having read the manual,
Yeah.
right? You can get IKEA furniture with a manual, and you have the knowledge of your basic Swedish words, but
Yeah.
trying to put it together feels like a very different endeavor.
For sure. So, what do you make of this? So, there is a statistic in 2024 that there was a lot of first time buyers, and it was not for a house, it
Mm,
was for the Bible,
yeah,
particularly among Gen Z. And, but it was that there's a lot of people who are, I think, now exploring the realms of Christianity and then speak. And it was, I think, the top selling book as of last year.
that's wild.
Yeah.
And they've gotten cheaper.
Which that's nice. That's nice to know. I did not know that.
Yeah, you think of like I mean, historically, copies of the Bible were handwritten painstakingly, and they cost equivalent of thousands, if not more, dollars. And then printing press comes, and it's a little bit cheaper. But yeah, it's the one asset that increases in value and depreciates in price. Uh, unlike the Raleigh housing market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think kind of like they were talking this, I think people are hungry, whether it's for kind of we're here in the South in the Bible Belt, re-engaging with Christianity. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I grew up Southern Baptist. I grew up Presbyterian. I grew up Catholic." But for a time, I just kind of felt like something my family did and didn't really mean a lot. But, I've made some changes in my life and reorganized my friends group and structure to have people that are healthier in my life. And so now, I'm getting older, I'm married and having kids. And so, I mean, we see this, we've known this for a long time, that the human lifespan, right, in human development, that as we get older, we look back, right? We reevaluate what's my legacy going to be, and what have I lived my life for, and who have I lived it for, and um, yeah. So I think it feels maybe a little safer for people to re-engage. It might not be the exact church they grew up in or the exact tradition they grew up in, but maybe it feels safer to kind of reapproach that in a way of like I've done the healing for some of those things that felt toxic or traumatic or just not useful or helpful. And how do I kind of re-engage with this in a way that means something to me now? And I think I'm just entirely anecdotally, but I'm seeing people our age that are re-engaging with the faith that they were raised in, and their parents are no longer, or they're just kind of very casually like attending a church, or like it feels like much more of a cultural. We just show up and do this thing on Sunday, and then millennials or Gen Z are, oh, this actually means something to me again. And it's kind of an interesting reverse evangelization where the children are now kind of preaching back to the parents of like, hey, like your life is on the back half here. So what does that mean for us? And what do you want your life to mean for you? And do you need to live in this massive house with all these things and spend your money in this certain way? Or is there a way we can kind of reevaluate our life and uh, look forward to the remaining years living in a way that brings meaning and value. So it's an interesting time. I don't know if anyone. I'm sure there's some research scientists that predicted this, but Yeah, it does feel like a kind of an interesting surprise.
It is. Well, to your point, I am, as we've talked about this, like one of those people who grew up Catholic, dipped in and out from, I'll say, for the better portion of over a decade. And then recently was like, maybe after talking with Jamie Drescher on the podcast, who gave me the assignment to go to church, and I went, okay, fine, you got me. So I did my homework and I was like,
Yeah.
where do I go? Because around here, there are churches of every kind on every corner.
Oh yeah.
And so, which is, I think, geographically and culturally different from like